Hi, Karl-Axel here from Outvitro, the mobile sports test clinic in Sweden. Here we're going to look at what the VO2 max test is, how such a test protocol can look like, and it's a very detailed performance procedure demonstrated with a stationary cycling test, for educational purposes for those interested. For you as an athlete, I will also include discussion in the end on what you can expect from the results from this type of test, so stay with me. First, let us just remind us on what VO2 max is. VO2 max, aka maximal oxygen consumption or maximal aerobic capacity, is the maximal rate of oxygen consumption by the body. The aerobic energy pathway is the most biggest energy system in the body. To get a perception on that, for example, in a 10k run race lasting 40 minutes, typically around 90% of the energy to produce that effort comes from the aerobic energy system. VO2 max is thus the single most important performance metrics in endurance activities lasting down to just about 1 minute in length. So this applies from all the way up to the 10-hour Ironman triathlon down to the 400-meter track run race. Oxygen consumption, or VO2, can be directly measured by a respiratory device with an oxygen sensor. It's attached to a face mask in different ways depending on what kind of sampling system that is used, and it's measuring the difference between the ambient air and the exhaled air. For each molecule of oxygen that you steal from the air around you, energy is produced by the aerobic energy system in the body. And then with the amount of oxygen consumed, you can find out how much energy produced this corresponds to with indirect calorimetry calculation, which some needs to know for some modeling applications, like for example the rest metabolic rate test, where you measure how much energy you burn at rest and project that to energy consumption in an ordinary day, as for nutrition advice. To add, for such rest and low intensity application, it helps greatly if you measure CO2, that is exhaled carbon dioxide as well, to know the exact contribution of fat and carbohydrate, which matters for the energy calculation. Anyway, back from that little sidetrack, when having such mentioned VO2 measuring equipment available for the VO2 max test, then when at a stationary setup in a lab where the intensity is easily and accurately controlled on an ergometer or treadmill, a progressive ramp protocol is mostly used. After warm-up, you start at or slightly below an aerobic threshold, that is medium intensity, and the intensity is increased every 1 minute or so until failure. Other types of protocols that is used is, for example, a steady all-out 5-minute protocol, or an aggressive anaerobic depleting start variant, coming down to a sustainable VO2 max intensity plateau after about 90 seconds or so. More on this another time, but these are better when testing outside in the field anyway, as it gets more cumbersome to control that the athletes hold the correct intensity. All of the protocols require an all-out effort by the athlete, and they should give all about the same results if performed correctly. In this demonstration of a VO2 max ramp test protocol, I'm using myself as the subject, taking no shortcuts here in the production. After getting comfortable on the bike and a few minutes rest after that, I'm ready to go. I'm taking on the mask. You see here that I don't need an assistant from this particular convenient device called VM Pro from the manufacturer VO2 Master. This little device sits right on the blue face mask, and it uses a passive sampling system to get the air through the same high-grade galvanic oxygen sensor found in high-end stationary bulky lab equipment. There's no cables, tubing or moving parts for the gas sampling system. That has become very characterizing for this type of equipment. It makes testing outdoors in the field particularly more easy and non-invasive. I'm using 30-second steps and started slightly below anaerobic threshold, which I happen to know at this occasion lying around 280 watts for me. The step duration and intensity increases should be planned so the test lasts between 4 and 8 minutes ideally, as the aerobic energy system is pretty slow started. In this specific cycling setup we're looking at here, the test subject is just told to keep a steady self-preferred cadence throughout the test. The Stack 0 Halcyon Smart Trainer used there is in erg mode, so resistance is automatically adjusted no matter cadence to match step intensity according to the program protocol, the blue bars there. I happen to have done the similar test and protocol here just a couple of weeks earlier from this occasion, and I stopped them there after the 460 watt step. Using the identical protocol in future tests is good for a direct performance comparison opportunity, and the test subject can be mentally encouraged to make it longer into the test next time. The test stops when the athlete decides to stop or can't hold the step power any longer. The ticking noise we hear here is the device valve opening and closing to sample and analyze each breath individually. Okay, looking at the results here afterwards, focusing on what's important for the actual test protocol. We have the heart rate curve here in red and the power in yellow. The data here is unsmoothed, so we can see that the power in reality jumps around quite a lot in each steps, even though the average power for each step is very close to the target. The orange data here taking up a lot of space is ventilation. You can do different kind of analysis on this data in other tests, but we won't discuss that for now. The blue VO2 curve is what we mainly want to be looking at to extract the result from this test naturally. Expressed here in the weight relative unit, milliliters per kilos per minute. The VO2, when measured breath by breath at the mouth, needs to be averaged in some way when determining the VO2 max, as breathing has a very volatile characteristic. The VO2 peak, defining here as the single highest VO2 breath, might be significantly higher and will overestimate if used as the VO2 max. You can see here in the chart that we use the average of the highest 15 seconds to determine VO2 max. But you could use any duration of like 10, 20 or 30 seconds and get slightly different results, but they're all fine naturally as long as the same method is used for future tests. Okay, how to know if the test was successful and the results valid? The three main criteria we want to check off to ensure that are a plateau in VO2 and in heart rate at the end of the test. Looking at this data, you might want to smooth it a bit more in the analysis program to see that. If there's no plateau tendency at all in the end, the culprit could be that the test duration was too short and the steps rapidly increased. And thirdly, RPE, rating of perceived effort, should have been at least 18 out of 20 or something like that in the end when interviewing the test subject afterwards. If it didn't feel all out for some reasons, like feeling sick or weird, uncomfortable with the equipment, etc., the test might have to be discarded. Lastly to mention, due to the nature of heart rate and the aerobic energy system, this is a suitable protocol as well, doing the same time to determine the athlete's max heart rate, which can be used for calculating training zones, etc. So this is some useful bonus data that the athlete gets as well from the test. Okay, getting on to discussing the usage of the VO2 max metric in sport. Like I said, VO2 max is the single most important performance metric in any pure endurance sport and discipline, even quite short ones. It's therefore of big interest to measure it over time if you want to track your performance, and especially if you want to see more in detail how you respond, for example, to a specific training regime. The individual achievable genetic limit in a human is observed to be in the range from like 20 to 100 milliliters per kilo per minutes, depending on age, sex, health, training status, etc. But also importantly, which specific measured activity you did the VO2 max test in, as it depends on how much muscle mass that was involved. For example, in trained cyclists, we see numbers mostly between 45 and 85. I would say this result I got in this very test of 63.5 can be considered to be a very good result for a recreational male cyclist, or a somewhat poor result for a competitive amateur rider, however you like to express it. Some tend to have a disbelief in the importance of VO2 max, as they get the perception that it has a relatively low correlation to real performance, especially in longer disciplines, like for example the average power output for a 40k cycling time trial or a 10k run race. Like for example, I have a VO2 max of 55 as a runner, and my two running buddies, they measured 59 and 64 when they went and got tested recently. But we all three did the 10k run race in exactly 40 minutes. So why should I care about VO2 max if it seems to be so off to predict performance? Yes, this perception is true, but what it means is that there are just as well other significant parameters, primarily anaerobic capacity and movement economy, that matters to such performance. And we need to understand and measure those two to get the complete picture. Then when we get this holistic overview, we really start to understand the numbers, and we can do a lot with them. Like accurate performance predictions, calculations of any race duration, and detailed evaluation of your individual response of a training program. Luckily, there is now, since just recent years, good science put together in software that measures all of these significant performance metrics, including the VO2 max, possible to do in a single test protocol. Our sports test clinic offers this in cycling, running and swimming, and for cycling you can even do this as a self-administrated protocol without any lab lactate or VO2 equipment, using another method and model for determination. If you're interested in that, you can read more about it on our website outvitor.se or inside.com. This discussion might seem to make the conventional VO2 max test somewhat obsolete, but it's still anyhow a quick and cheaper price test done in a single boot of effort and tells you quite a lot of your sport-specific performance capacity, and as well as a metric for general health for non-athletes. Thank you for the attention and happy testing!